In any American city in the late 1800s, early 1900s, cities would be teeming with vibrant community interactions. Wide streets filled with children playing, neighbors gathering for casual conversations, merchants pushing carts and selling goods, and countless of pedestrians spontaneously crossing the street wherever they please. These streets back then were more than just transportation routes. They were dynamic public spaces used by everyone, spaces that embodied life, community, and interaction. Every person had equal rights to these thoroughfares, and the idea of restricting pedestrian movement seemed entirely unthinkable until a revolutionary technological advancement, the automobile. So, join us today while we discuss the strangely racist history of jaywalking. And if you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. If you like audio-only episodes, you can find my podcast wherever you get your podcasts. But without further ado, let's get started. Starting in the early 20th century, the social dynamic began to shift dramatically with the arrival of a new technological advancement, the automobile. By the 1900s, particularly in the decade of the 20s, increasing numbers of automobiles swiftly descended on the streets of American cities, promising speed, excitement, status, and convenience. Quickly, they became more than just a novelty. They represented progress in modern, prosperous society. But the new freedom innovation came with a steep price. What had been a communal space safe for children, families, and elderly pedestrians became increasingly dangerous, even deadly. Cities across America grappled with concerns over soaring injuries and tragic accidents and sudden death connected to automobiles. Pedestrian casualties rose dramatically as people unaccustomed to these fast-moving machines tried to navigate these suddenly perilous streets. Initially, opinion was largely sympathetic to pedestrians. Newspapers and journalists regularly reported on the disturbing rise in automobile-related fatalities, calling attention to the very real human toll of these cars. Emotional articles detailed heartbreaking tragedies alongside poignant illustrations portraying cars as ruthless killing machines. Judges across America routinely placed accountability firmly upon drivers, often fining and imprisoning them after serious accidents. An outcry arose from communities nationwide demanding strict regulations, better enforcement, and speed limits, and harsher legal ramifications for reckless driving. Understandably alarmed by this public reaction, automobile companies and their allies quickly realized that continued market growth and future profitability depended greatly on shifting the blame away from car operators and on to pedestrians themselves. So car manufacturers joined forces with powerful associations, auto clubs, and industry-funded think tanks and advertising networks to embark on an intense nationwide campaign. Their message was clear, persistent, and profoundly troubling. They deliberately introduced and popularized a new derogatory term, jaywalking, applying this label exclusively to pedestrians who cross streets without following newly imposed rules that favored automobiles. The word jay in the early 20th century was American slang that labeled a person as naive, unsophisticated, or simply clueless, a country bumpkin, if you will. This careful insult thus effectively branded previously acceptable pedestrian behavior, crossing streets freely, as backwards, irresponsible, and socially unacceptable. In 1925, Los Angeles became among the earliest large cities in America to enact pedestrian protections and regulatory ordinance, criminalizing street crossing practices that had once been commonplace. Soon after, in 1928, automobile companies working alongside federal government officials, notably Herbert Hoover, then the Secretary of Commerce, to create nationwide model municipal traffic ordinance. This landmark legislation swiftly became the standard template for cities and towns across America, permanently codifying pedestrian behaviors as punishable offenses and establishing the automobile as the king of the streets. Yet, Beneath this regulatory transformation lays something even darker, a history tangled in systemic racism, aggressive policing, and glaring injustice. What began as a campaign orchestrated largely by the automotive industry began to shift blame from reckless drivers onto pedestrians, quickly evolved into something else, a powerful tool to disproportionately target Black and Latino communities. In American cities from coast to coast, jaywalking enforcement wasn't simply about public safety, but it became an easily deployed justification for racial profiling and police harassment. In Los Angeles, while Black folks represent just 9% of the city's population, they reflected nearly 2/3 of all jaywalking tickets issued over a 10-year period. In New York, Black and Latino residents accounted for nearly 90% of the jaywalking citations, despite only making up about half the population. These stark statistics expose a disturbing reality. Far too often, minor pedestrian stops escalate into intimidation, detention, and even violence. Tupac Shakur famously endured a brutal confrontation with police simply for crossing the street. In Asheville, North Carolina, Johnny Jermaine Rush was vicious assaulted by police after initially being stopped for jaywalking. These incidents are not isolated. They are evidence of a larger pattern, a use of minor infractions to legitimize the surveillance and policing of Black and brown bodies. Tying jaywalking enforcement into the infamous broken window policy strategy makes matters even worse. These policies aim to crack down on small violations in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods, not with the goal of improving safety, but as justification for increased police presence and oversight. At its core, jaywalking became a pretext for control, criminalization, and to oppress marginalized communities. And what about the safety? The very thing that these policies sought to achieve. Traffic safety experts have long pointed out the flaw in policing pedestrian movement. Policing jaywalking laws simply don't save lives. Selena Reynolds, LA's transportation head, openly admitted that aggressively policing pedestrians does nothing meaningful to curb fatalities. Instead, it obscures the real culprits: dangerous road designs, poorly lit crosswalks, unsafe speed limits, and reckless drivers who are rarely held accountable. When cities fail to invest properly in sidewalks, crosswalks, and safe crossings, jaywalking isn't rebellious. It is a simply necessary act of survival for pedestrians. Consider this fact: 60% of pedestrian deaths happen outside of crosswalks, largely because crosswalks either don't exist or don't properly align with the communal needs. There's a hard truth that jaywalking laws enforced disproportionately in low-income neighborhoods and people of color aren't making anyone safe. They're just making inequalities worse. Fortunately, there seems to be some change in the air. It's a growing movement uniting transportation advocates, grassroots organizers, and racial justice groups pushing back. Nevada has removed jaywalking entirely from its misdemeanor list. Virginia has banned the policing of jaywalking alone to justify pedestrian stops. Kansas City has repealed jaywalking laws outright, and the city of New York has abandoned decades-old jaywalking statutes, acknowledging the deeply ingrained racial disparities that it created. Yet, the most groundbreaking law has come in California with the Assembly Bill 1238, the Freedom to Walk Act, effective January 1st, 2023. This groundbreaking law doesn't simply relax enforcement, it explicitly prevents police from targeting pedestrians making safe street crossings. The Freedom to Walk Act ensures crossing safely no longer means risky harassment, intimidation, or violence from authorities. Nearly 90 statewide advocates, grassroots groups have united to champion this reform, solidified by a major victory against racial profiling and unfair law enforcement practices. At its heart, this shift signals something larger, a societal reckoning on how neutral rules from street crossing to traffic stops reinforce historical racial oppression. Activists like Tamika Butler emphasize that these reforms are not just about jaywalking. They are necessary acts of equality, of reclaiming public streets and public spaces for everyone, especially in long marginalized communities. Jaywalking laws were never about keeping citizens safe. Instead, they reflect a history of deliberate infrastructure neglect, discriminatory enforcement, and systemic oppression. By confronting and dismantling these unjust daily barriers. We are moving forward to create streets that are built with freedom, dignity, and equality. A reality where the simple act of crossing the street becomes exactly what it's always meant to be, a basic human right. Thank you. I'm your host, Country Boy. This has been One Mic Black History. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. Also, if you like audio-only episodes, you can find those wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support my podcast, you can do so on my Buy Me Coffee or the Patreon page in the description below. Also, I'd like to thank all my financial contributors. Without you, none of this could be possible. I have a Substack. It is in the link below. Check it out. It is awesome. Thank you all. I love you. Peace.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.